Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked on Wolves. Today on the show, Tim Connelly has been largely mistake-free, but yet not really risk-averse as the Timberwolves president of basketball operations. I'll talk about why that's so important and what I mean by all that on the show here today. Welcome in. You are Locked on Wolves.
You are Locked on Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Happy Thursday, everybody. Today on the show, I want to dive into a bit of a kind of we'll get a little in the weeds on Tim Connelly's tenure so far in Minnesota. It's not like a full unpacking, but what really spurred this on is an ESPN article about the worst mistake each team's made in the last 5+ years in terms of front office moves. And Minnesota ranked toward the bottom half in terms of their moves. Their worst move wasn't actually all that bad. And I actually still think they messed up where they ranked it. We'll talk about that in a second, what it was, why I don't necessarily agree. But then that also got me thinking like, hey, look, that wasn't even a Tim Connelly move. It was a Gerson Rosas move. Tim Connelly's been largely mistake-free. I want to talk about specifically the trades he's made and over his tenure. We'll close the show with a couple of Wolves notes here for the last couple of days. So all that is coming up here today. A big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. All right. So first, let's talk about this article. And I want to talk about a trend that emerged as I was looking through this article. So the title of this article on ESPN is All 30 NBA Teams' Biggest Roster Mistakes Since 2020. So that goes back to the beginning of the calendar year of 2020. Of course, trade deadline of 2020 is included in that. That offseason, of course, being the COVID offseason. So weird offseason there. So it's like 5.5 years is ultimately what it is. It includes an extra trade deadline and offseason in there. So the bottom, like the least consequential, what they're calling small scale problems, I'll give a couple examples. Like Cleveland was 30th. Their biggest mistake was declining Isaiah Hartenstein's qualifying offer in 2021. Nobody knew he was going to be as good as he was. And they, the Pacers at 29, hiring Nate Bjorkgren as their head coach. That felt like it could have been a little higher, but it was only 1 year. It allowed them to then hire Rick Carlisle. The Knicks signed Evan Fournier for 4 years and $73 million in 28, and on and on and on. The Timberwolves are number 16 on this list within the category entitled Draft Disasters. Or I'm sorry, they're actually first of the next tier. So that goes up through 17. Tier 3 is miscellaneous mid-tier mistakes. So Minnesota's 16 out of 30 in terms of teams that have made like the 16th worst mistake is what they're saying. One per team, right? And the move that they have listed is trading for D'Angelo Russell in 2020. Now, remember that deal? Minnesota, there were a lot of guys involved. It was, hey, we need to find somebody that can play off of Karl-Anthony Towns. We need to find a pick and roll partner for Karl-Anthony Towns. We need to make sure Cat's happy and wants to stay in Minnesota. That was definitely a little piece of it as well. Remember that trade was Andrew Wiggins along with picks, one that ended up becoming Jonathan Kuminga. That, remember, it was protected top 3, and then it ended up conveying because it was the 7th overall pick, and the Warriors got Kuminga with it, and then a 2nd-round pick that same year. So a 1st and a 2nd in Andrew Wiggins. The Wolves got Jacob Evans and Amari Spellman along with Russell. I don't believe either. I think Spellman never played in a game. I think Evans briefly played in regular season games with the Wolves. That was the trade. And then that was on the heels of the massive trade they made with Denver, of course, ironic there, where they traded out Robert Covington. Well, that was a 4-team trade. That was Robert Covington, Jordan Bell, Keita Bates-Diop, Shabazz Napier, Noah Vonleh. They got back Malik Beasley, Juancho Hernan-Gomez, Jared Vanderbilt, and picks. That was a much better trade. This D'Lo trade, it's interesting. It doesn't stand out. Like, I wouldn't have guessed that was their biggest mistake. I would have thought that they would have gone with one of the draft picks. Like, they've obviously picked guys that haven't panned out. Like, I think Jarrett Culver was the 2019 draft, so it would have, like, that just missed this list. But like, it just never felt like, obviously Russell didn't work out in Minnesota in the sense that they eventually moved on from him anyway, but it was hard to really argue with that at the time, given what the Wolves were giving up, and it was kind of a change of scenery thing for both. And I don't know, like it just seemed like a weird move to pick, and also to rank it 16th. So then I started looking at the teams that were in the top 10 on this list, and 9 of the top 10 are just straight up trades, are just bad trades taking on bad money. Number 10, by the way, is committing $400 million to Paul George and Joel Embiid. And I know that one was a re-signing and one was a free agent signing, but that I'll put that in the big swing category, right? Number 9, the Bulls trading for Nikola Vucevic. Number 8, the Grizzlies trading for Marcus Smart. Number 7, the Hawks trading for DeJounte Murray. The Pelicans, number 6, trading for DeJounte Murray, who I've never been a big fan of, and has been a bad trade for both of those teams, or was acquired in a bad move for both those teams. Number 5 was the Kings messing up the Halliburton Fox situation. Number 4, the Nets trading for James Harden. Number 3, the Bucks trading for Dame Lillard. Number 2, the Suns trading for Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal in the same year. And number 1, the Mavericks trading away Luka Doncic. So 9 of the top 10 were straight up trades. And 8 of the top 10 were acquiring somebody in a trade, like making an active choice to acquire a star for the team. Okay? Now, remember when the Timberwolves traded for Rudy Gobert? And we're going to talk about this in the context of Tim Connelly's moves, and that was in summer of 22, just a couple months after Tim Connelly was hired by the Timberwolves. At the time, many people hated it for Minnesota. And what was it, Russillo or was it Simmons? I don't know. One of those guys on the Simmons show were talking about how this was one of the worst trades in NBA history. Like, nobody's saying that now. People may still argue it was an overpay, and I will hear that argument. Fine. They gave up a lot of picks, right? They're still paying in picks. However, it can't be one of the worst trades of all time when the team improved and went to back-to-back conference finals. Just can't be. The next year, immediately, they were slightly worse, and that was just because of the acclimation period for Rudy, injuries, etc. Really young Anthony Edwards, year 2 Anthony Edwards. They were the 8th seed that year after being the 6th seed the year before. But then consecutive conference finals in years 2 and 3 with Rudy Gobert. So that cannot be one of the worst trades of all time. And I want to talk a little bit about, well, actually, we can do this now, why it was obviously not a bad trade for Minnesota. In the moment, I understood the weeping and gnashing of teeth over the value that the Wolves placed on Rudy Gobert. But the reason why it wasn't a massive risk and not in the same category as a lot of these other trades on this list is because Rudy Gobert as a player is the ultimate floor raiser. We've talked about that before on the show, but he's only been on a not top 10 defense one time in his career. Like, he's a walking top 10 defense. And for a team that was middle of the pack defensively prior to his arrival, and prior to that even worse, that made a ton of sense. He's a floor raiser defensively. Like, he is a known quantity. Trading for aging Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal to be the second star somewhere where he's never had to be the second real star, that's a huge question mark. Trading for Damian Lillard at that point in his career, that one maybe was a little less risky, and it ended up obviously not good. Trading for James Harden is always a risk. I don't care who you are. Trading for DeJounte Murray at that point in his career, nobody really knew what he was, a massive risk. Trading for Marcus Smart, if you're the Grizzlies and you already have Ja Morant, trading for Marcus Smart, and obviously injuries were a part of this, still a little bit risky. That one I'd maybe put in the same category as Dame, where like it turned out worse than maybe you would have thought of in the moment. Trading for Vucevic, I mean, that was a weird kind of like, we don't want to fully tank thing for the Bulls. Obviously a mistake. Like, there was no world in which Rudy Gobert wasn't still going to be a walking top 10 defense. The question was the cost that you gave up to acquire him. And in Tim Connelly's mind, the cost to improve the Wolves from a borderline playoff team to a floor of a 5-6 seed with a much higher ceiling because of the anchor, because the floor is raised, the ceiling is also raised for what you can be if you're a top 3 defense like they were 2 years ago, their first conference finals year. It was not that big of a risk. It was only a risk in terms of, man, you gave up a lot of picks for this guy. But Gobert was always going to be good for the next 2 to 4 to 5 years. And hopefully that continues to be the case. Has he regressed a little? Not regressed. Has he aged a little? Sure. Everyone does. But he's still a walking top 10, 12 defense. There's no question about that. I want to talk about some of the other moves that Tim Connelly has made and why it's, I mean, like, you had to go back to the previous regime to find a bad trade for this list is what ESPN had to do. We'll do that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action, so why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. You can use FanDuel to track your favorite matchups, no matter what sport it is you're following this summer. The app will keep it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It is super easy to use. They pay out fast, and they make even regular season games, which in baseball, we're about to be in the dog days of baseball. Not every game feels super meaningful. It'll make them feel like must-watch events. If you're placing a same-game parlay, maybe the most exciting thing you can do, or you just want to watch your bet right into the ninth inning, FanDuel will make it feel like you're part of the action. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right. So going through time, like I spent a little time clicking through. I like using prosportstransactions.com. I know that sounds weird, but like I like the way it's formatted. It's got everything laid out. You can sort by draft pick transactions. You can look at future picks owed. It's a really like little random plug there for this site. Prosportstransactions.com is great. So you go through the Tim Connelly tenure, and I literally just kind of clicked through every page on this. Tim Connelly starts off with a bang, right? Like first he's got to deal with the draft. I'm not going to get into every draft trade transaction. Like I'm talking beyond that. I'm not going to get into extensions. I really just want to focus on trades today. So like in that first draft, he messed around. He got the Josh Minot pick. He acquired the pick that eventually became Jalen Clark. The following year, he of course drafted Walker Kessler, traded up to draft Walker Kessler. Or I'm sorry, he didn't trade up to get him. He drafted Wendell Moore Jr. He did trade up for that selection, which, I mean, you could argue that's his worst move, was actually packaging assets, future second round picks, the rights to Ty Washington, who obviously hasn't been a player either, to draft Wendell Moore Jr., who never turned into what they thought he could be. But then that July, so like less than 2 months after he was hired, he hauls off and makes the Gobert trade. He trades out Beasley, Beverly, Balmaro, Jared Vanderbilt, the rights to Walker Kessler had just been drafted, and 4 future first rounders, 3 future first rounders, and 2 future swaps. A ton of stuff, right, to get Gobert. That, at the moment, everyone thought was an absolute disaster. What other trades has he made? Well, his next trade he made at the following trade deadline, so the following February, was a slam dunk of a deal, and it was the other side of the D'Angelo Russell deal. Remember that whole offseason, he had to answer all these questions about, are you going to trade D'Lo, and the whole thing, and everyone kind of figured he would, because D'Lo's not a Tim Connelly guy. Like if you know Tim Connelly, you know what he's looking for. He's not looking for a guy who's empty calories offense and lackadaisical defense. He's a big guard, which Tim likes. He's, good passer, which Tim Connelly obviously likes out of his point guards. Who doesn't? But like he wasn't a long-term fit in Minnesota. What did he do? In a 3-team trade, he sends out D'Lo, and that's all he sends out. He acquires Mike Conley, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and 3 second-round picks, which is just crazy. That's just an insane trade. And in the moment, I liked it because I thought Mike Conley was a better fit for Minnesota. I thought Nickeil was a throw-in. I think everyone did. You don't have to go far to find that. I think I did like a half segment on Nickeil at the end of the show after the trade happened. I liked the second-round picks that he got. I was like, look, straight up, I would have done Conley for D'Lo because of the fit for Minnesota, not because, and in the moment, my argument at the time was, in a vacuum, you could still argue D'Lo is a better player than at the time, 35-year-old Mike Conley, 34-year-old Mike Conley. Like I thought you could still make that argument. But for Minnesota, as they were constructed, getting a guard who is better as in the team concept defensively and a true, I know D'Lo's a veteran and guys like D'Lo, but like a guy that could really lead the team and help them take that next step. And clearly Chris Finch didn't trust D'Angelo Russell. Remember the playoffs prior, before Rosas came on board, when they lost to Memphis, that was the series when he played Jordan McLaughlin over D'Lo down the stretch in Game 5. He didn't trust D'Angelo Russell. He wanted to move off of him. Chris Finch did. So the trade made a ton of sense, and it's aged spectacularly. Easily one of the best moves that's been made by Tim Connelly to date. He didn't make another trade for a while, like a lot of draft moves. And again, I don't want to get into that. A lot of, free agency type stuff. The next trade was the following trade deadline. No trades in the offseason when he traded for Monte Morris. Now, this one, it was a bit more of a wash because he traded a pair of guys who were going to be free agents anyway in Troy Brown Jr. and Shake Milton. And he did trade a 2030 second round pick. for Monte Morris. Monte Morris was actually good for the close in the regular season for Minnesota. Wasn't great in the playoffs and was never consistently part of the rotation. Chris Finch never really seemed to trust Monte Morris either. And clearly I think it was a quad or hamstring he had injured with the Pistons in the fall was lingering. And even since then with Phoenix and elsewhere, there just hasn't been much there yet or left for Monte Morris. That one was kind of a whatever trade. And in the moment, it made a lot of sense and it didn't really hurt Minnesota. They didn't give up any real assets. And Monte Morris was not the reason Minnesota got to the conference finals, nor was he the reason they lost in the conference finals. So kind of a nothing trade. And then the next trade was in the draft last summer, where Minnesota did take a big swing. But it's similar to the Gobert swing in that there's limited immediate. Actually, in some ways, it's the opposite, right? Because the Gobert trade, there was immediate backlash. Like, how could you trade all these first-round picks for Rudy Gobert? But at the same time, it was safe because Rudy had a floor of a walking top 10 defense or whatever. This trade, there's no immediate backlash because you're trading a 2031 first-round pick and the option to swap in 2030. So nothing for at least 6 years and no tangible assets for 7 years. And so nobody's going to be like, how dare you do that? They got the 8th pick in the draft to draft Rob Dillingham. So, well, there's certainly volatility in that, and we've seen it in the last, 13 months with Rob Dillingham. He's not a rotation player yet. We saw the volatility, but, some good signs in the Summer League this year. We don't know how that's going to play out, but the risk is relatively limited. Nobody said this is a bad deal. You're talking about an asset 7 years in the future. And so they got Dillingham for the swap of 2030 picks and the 2031 first-round pick. That's a good trade. Unless Rob Dillingham takes a hard left turn and is terrible this year, that's a good trade. Even if he turns out to be a good backup point guard, instant offense off the bench, that's still a good trade based on what that asset's worth way down the line. Some sign-in trades mixed in there, the Kyle Anderson thing, so that, I don't really want to spend too much time thinking about that. The Wendell Moore Jr. trade to get a second-round pick back, which was, essentially getting him off the roster and getting something of an asset, even if it's a limited asset back. And then, of course, the Cat trade, which the jury's very much still out. And while that was risky in terms of you're trading your second-best player on the eve of training camp, there's also a floor on that one too, because Julius Randle's still an all-star player. And what was the worst case scenario? They were a 500 team this year. And actually they were only 4 games better than 500 when it was all said and done in the regular season. They still went to the conference finals. So could it have absolutely tanked the team? Yeah, I guess so. But you got back 2 good players for 1 really good player. And your roster didn't get obviously worse. You probably got deeper you did get deeper overall because it was a 2-for-1. And you avoided the second apron issue and some of the stuff they would have had to deal with this summer. So I was critical of the trade at the time, and you could still, it's hard to quibble too much since they did go to the conference finals, but you could still not like it, but it was always not that dangerous of a trade. Like Julius Randle's a good player. Dante DiVincenzo is a good player. This is another, again, Tim Connelly's not risk averse. He's just really smart. He's pushing the right buttons, pulling the right levers, knowing that none of these moves he's going to make, there isn't a massive downside to any of them, except for the immediate reaction to the Rudy trade. But he was paying the price that he felt it would take to take Minnesota from a borderline playoff team to a solid playoff team with a chance to be a championship team. That's exactly what he did. And he said, I'll do a slight overpay here. And the funny thing is, you look at the other team that Tim Connelly ran, the Denver Nuggets, both of these teams are teams that the national media and others will tell you they need to take a big swing because they're not going to win in free agency, right? They need to acquire a superstar via these big trades, or they're not going to be able to win because they can't sign the big free agents. What did we talk about in the first segment? 9 of the top 10 of these bad moves were teams taking big swings and taking big swings as making a trade. And actually, if you want to add in the others, those are free agency related moves. None of them are drafting somebody. Because the draft, as much as it's terrible to swing and miss with the top 4 pick or whatever, you don't want to burn through assets. Don't get me wrong, but you're not hamstringing your franchise for the future years because you drafted the wrong guy at number 3 or number 4. And in Tim Connelly's case, he's right more than he's wrong. And there've been draft misses, but look at how many draft picks he's acquired. He was the one that picked Nikola Jokic in the second round. He certainly had some misses, more so with Denver than so far in Minnesota. We talked about missing on the Wendell Moore pick. But again, if you're missing with the late first round pick, there's a lot less consequence there. And he certainly, I know Ant was a Gerson Rosas pick. That was pretty much a slam dunk with that selection. But everything else Tim Connelly has done has been a measured risk. in the trade market. And he hasn't given out crazy contracts that aren't tradable later. What have I said after every extension? The first Nas extension, the second Nas extension, the Rudy extension. These are all movable contracts. There are no albatrosses on the books for Minnesota. Tim Connelly knows what he's doing. He knows what will be a movable contract later and what will not be a movable contract later. And the roster has been malleable. It's a puzzle that can mix and match. There's multiple windows that have opened and closed. Whatever analogy you want to use. Tim Connelly has done the right things in nearly every one of these trade situations. And obviously, jury's still out on what he's done so far this offseason, the extensions for Randle and Nas, and letting Nikhil walk. But there's a lot of evidence to suggest this dude just is really, really good at what he's doing. And you look at some of these other terrible moves that teams have made, a lot of them by regimes that are still in place in their respective markets. Timberwolves are lucky to have Tim Connelly. I want to talk about another couple of Wolves news and notes things, switching gears here as we close out the show, and that's what we'll do today to close. All right. Couple of notes here. First, I meant to bring this up on Wednesday's show, and I forgot to do it, but Terrence Shannon Jr. was rightfully, justifiably named to the first team for all Summer League. It's not just Vegas. It was Summer League and the Salt Lake City one. And Terrence Shannon on the first team, along with Jordan Miller from the Clippers, David Jones-Garcia from the Spurs, Kyle Filipowski, of course, second-year player from the Jazz, and then Nick Clifford, who I liked and I picked in the mock draft, the locked-on mock draft at 17 for the Wolves. Nick Clifford was on the first team for the Kings. Second team was Ron Holland with the Pistons, Isaac Jones with the Kings, Con Kneppel, of course, the Hornets, who won the championship in Vegas, AJ Mitchell with the Thunder, and KJ Simpson with the Hornets. Like we talked about this at length. There's not a whole lot else to say about TJ Shannon other than he did exactly what was asked. And he also, like I talked about, looking like a pro, looking the part on the floor. It's fair to remind everyone the dude's 25. Like he's 5'6", in some cases 7 years older than some of these guys that are on the floor. Like think about that. He's 7 years older than Joan Beranger and Rocco Zikarsky, which is crazy. And he has a full year as a pro, 5 years in college. That's all true, but it's on him to improve from last year to this year. And he did that. The shot obviously looks better. He does all the stuff we expected him to do really well. The playing hard in transition, competing defensively, working on the glass, and then the facilitation and distribution looked that much better, which is what I was looking for most. And obviously, again, the shot looking really nice. Like I expected that. You know, as a reminder, as a prospect, you know, look at Illinois, it was more volume and you know, range based in terms of distance from the rim that like TJ could pull from anywhere, but the accuracy wasn't as much there, partly due to the volume. And if the accuracy, like he's unlikely to be a true star at the NBA level, in part given his age, but also the team he's on. Like he's not likely going to score 20 a game, at least in the next couple of years at the NBA level. He could kind of be a late bloomer. Maybe he gets an opportunity in the future with the Wolves or someone else to have more of a scoring role. I think he's more of a bench spark plug at this point. All that to say, the catch and shoot percentage is going to be paramount for him. Like, can he catch and shoot at a 42, 43+% clip? That's where he's going to get a lot of those opportunities. And then also if he can facilitate a little bit, play the Nikhil role off the bench and have some 20-point games here and there. Remember, he did when he started against the Lakers this year. I think that's all very doable for TJ Shannon. And what we saw from him in Summer League absolutely suggests that he could do just that, which is super encouraging. So congrats to him for getting first team in the Vegas Summer League. And then the other thing would be the New York Knicks were granted permission from the Timberwolves to interview Pablo Prigioni about joining Mike Brown's coaching staff. Of course, Prigioni's been in Minnesota for a long time now, like 6 seasons. He was hired by Ryan Saunders, and it was, I think, the only or maybe one of 2 holdovers on the actual coaching staff to Chris Finch's staff. And Prigioni has the opportunity to interview with the Knicks now. Of course, he played for the Knicks for 3+ seasons, several years ago. So perhaps there's more appeal to playing there. And, maybe he's already a front bench assistant, was the offensive coordinator under Ryan Saunders. Like, he's got a nice job in Minnesota, but if he ends up like as the lead assistant or whatever, I'm sure there'd be some attraction for him to go to New York and do that. So congrats to Prigioni for getting that opportunity. I think it's there's already been some turnover on the Timberwolves coaching staff too. So that'll be something else to keep an eye on. Typically it feels like mid-late August is kind of when we start to get more traction on who's on the coaching staff. They'll do a press release eventually between now and training camp, less than 2 months away, of course, on who ultimately is on the coaching staff, front bench assistants, etc. here in the next few weeks. So that's something we'll keep an eye on here as we move forward. That's all I got today. And what we're going to do here over the next week or so, we're still daily through next week, is we're going to have a couple of guests. We'll talk offseason to this point. Still a couple of roster spots open for Minnesota. So what could they look to do? Of course, once they do that, we'll have a lot to kind of break down. What impact could it have on the rotation? If it is somebody like a Malcolm Brogdon, would he be in the rotation? Or are the Wolves going to go more somebody who knows that they're going to have a bench role, a Luka Garza role, a deeper bench role, where they're not expecting to have a rotation role, I guess. So that'll be something to keep an eye on, because they could go either direction there still. And I'm curious to see what they do. So we'll obviously talk about that on the show here in the next couple of weeks too. Okay. That's all I got for you today on the show. Big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. A reminder, you can also follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves. Don't forget the T, and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. And a reminder that for your second listen, you can check out the Locked On NBA podcast. Our guys, Doug, Matt, and Hayes, will keep you informed all offseason long, up to date on everything, contract negotiations, rumors, anything and everything. Find Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And again, a reminder that we are daily through next week. And then in August, we'll go to 3 shows a week here at Locked On Wolves. So we're with you throughout the offseason. We'll get you to mid-September with the Timberwolves finally report for Media Day, training camp, and the whole thing. Schedule releases in there. Man, there's so much that still happens over the next couple of months. The NBA is almost as good as the NFL. Is like keeping people engaged year-round. There's so much going on still. Of course, Locked On Wolves is also part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.